they're not as constrained by local issues. They're not as constrained as they might feel by party loyalty. And they are prepared to use the European elections as a type of protest vote. We've seen that very often in the past where maverick candidates have done quite well. Dana was elected, and this caused a great shock to the established parties at the time. Declan Ganley did very well. We had Mick Wallace down in Wexford, a small candidate, non-party candidate who was elected. Cathy Sinnott and Luke Flanagan. These are all small party candidates or independent candidates who managed to be elected in the European elections. And I think people do see it as an opportunity to register a protest vote when they're not happy with the main parties, which they wouldn't necessarily take in a local election, and they may not necessarily take in a general election. But it is an opportunity for a party like ours to make a bit of a breakthrough. Luke pointed out to me there that at the time of the last European elections, the Irish Freedom Party was the 5th most investigated party on internet searches. I think, is that right, Luke? Is that what you said?
5th largest engagement on Twitter.
5th largest engagement on Twitter.
Perman was also at the 5th largest engagement of people.
Yeah, okay. So that shows there was a lot of interest during the last European elections in our party. Dolores Cahill ran for us. She got 10,000 votes, which was not a bad run for a first-time candidate. We're a lot more established since then. We have a much higher social media presence, and I think people will look at us and they will look at our policies, and they will perhaps, if we can get the word out there, they may take a chance and give us a vote. So we've got to try to make sure we maximise that vote. The main themes that we can cash in on are themes that other parties are simply not addressing. Immigration and refugees. We have been consistent on that. We want a responsible immigration policy. We can easily rebut the claim that we're racist about this. This is nonsense. Everybody knows that. The great majority of people are opposed to the positions taken on immigration and refugees by the parties that they normally vote for. And they will seek this opportunity to give their own parties a kicking and to send them a message, because it's the only way they can do it. While they may not do this in the general election, they may well do it in the European election. The return of sovereignty. Yes, people are beginning to wake up to the fact that we've lost sovereignty. We're increasingly losing sovereignty. We see the whole issue of NATO, the expansion of the war in the East, and we see the threat to Ireland's neutrality. We are very strong on that, and we're identified as being very strong on that. And that is a theme that we have got to sell during the upcoming election. Free speech. Ireland is in danger of becoming a pariah state internationally with the most aggressive attack against free speech and civil liberty of any modern democratic European state. People are worried about that. Everybody I know in Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, yes, they are very worried about it. But yet, 90 or 95% of the Dáil voted to pass it. Now, that shows the extraordinary disconnect that exists between the people and the parties that represent them. And that is an area where we can enter and show ourselves as a real and viable alternative. The general leftward drift of politics in the country is not in accordance with the people's wishes at all, at any level. And that comes about as a direct result of the fact that we're a part of an international organisation, the European Union, which has done everything it can to corrupt democracy and to prevent democracy in its own member states from emerging within the European Union. We can capitalise on that. The secularisation of our state and the sexual attacks against children is alarming a huge number of people who would be ordinarily mainstream, middle-of-the-road voters who would ordinarily assume that they can vote in safety for parties like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and that they will not force pornography into primary schools and into libraries, and will not force the castration of children and taking breasts off young girls without their parents' consent. They won't allow them to smoke without their parents' consent. They won't allow them to take a vaccine without their parents' consent. But they are prepared to allow them to be castrated or have their breasts removed without their parents' knowledge. That's the kind of country we're going for. That's the kind of fanatical nonsense that we're faced with. And yes, we can provide an alternative to people, and people are alarmed about this in increasing numbers. The whole possibility of a cashless society, people are increasingly becoming aware of this. And you cannot do business without your smartphone. You cannot do business without your credit card. The dangers of that have got to be highlighted. And again, we have emphasised that. We have been on this particular area right from the beginning. So that is something we can cash in on. The threat to neutrality. It is, I won't say it's a sacred issue for Irish people, but it's the correct position for us to take as a small country on the periphery of Europe. We do not need to be associated militarily with NATO. NATO has played a very, very dubious role in the present war. It has engaged in a lot of quite nefarious activities. We do not need to be associated with that. We do not need an association between NATO and the European Union, of which we are members. When we joined the European Union, we absolutely resisted the suggestion that this should lead to the joining of NATO, and there's no reason why it should. Again, we have been very strong on that, and that is something we can certainly sell at the European level. Agriculture and farmers' issues, certainly in the Munster seat and in the Connacht Ulster seat, there is one seat in each of those constituencies which will be determined by the farming community. And the farming community traditionally organised their own people, like TJ Maher in Munster was one of the first European MEPs. They are a very strong lobby. They may well decide to run a candidate themselves, and if they do, I'd be surprised if he's not elected. I hope they don't. I hope we can present ourselves to them now we're announcing our candidates. I hope we can go to them and point out that the Irish Freedom Party supports them. They are deeply concerned about the collapse of the rural communities, about the collapse of the rural economy, the proposed cattle cull of 200,000 cattle, which is going to destroy their way of life. The carbon taxes, the way the beef industry is manipulated to drive the price of the producer down. We've got to enter into that field. We've got to show to those organisations that we have realistic policies, that we support them, that we back them, and that we will stand up to the European threats and the threats of our own government against rural Ireland and against agriculture. A huge amount of which is emanating from the Green Party and their nonsensical climate policies and zero carbon policies. The reinstatement of Irish fisheries has got to be a key target for us. It was the biggest mistake we made when we joined the European Union. It has cost us huge amounts of money, far more than we've ever got from the European Union, and that is a very strong selling point for us. The whole issue of what happened over the last 3 years in regard to COVID, we need an investigation. We were the first party to come out and demand an end to the lockdowns 3 weeks after they started. We absolutely demanded that people should not be mandated to take COVID vaccinations. Now, you may say this is looking into the past. I don't think it is, because unfortunately, I believe this winter, you're going to see a re-emergence of the same types of policy. I hope to God that that doesn't happen. I hope that the terrible increases in death rates that we have witnessed are not going to continue. But we have demanded a full and detailed and independent investigation into the policies that were adopted during the COVID period. And the reason for that is not to get revenge, it's to make sure it doesn't happen again. We have a judicial system and a policing system that turned us back on our constitution and made no effort to protect the rights of movement and of freedom and of religious worship in this country. We need to make sure that that is never allowed to happen again. Thank you. We're a Eurosceptic party. We want to leave the European Union. I'd like to see the European Union being abolished. And we will be asked, what are you doing running for the European Parliament if you don't believe in the whole process of Europe? Well, my answer to that was, why did Daniel O'Connell run for election to Westminster when he believed in Home Rule? Because he had to work within the system. He had to go there, and he did achieve very significant liberties for Ireland in that process. But also, we should point out, at the moment, 20% of the European Parliament seats are occupied by the ECR group or the Identity group in Europe, all of which are deeply Eurosceptic parties, which enunciate the same types of policies that we enunciate, of returning sovereignty to the individual states, of decentralising the power of the European Union. Some of them, the AfD, for example, in the Identity group, Identity and Democracy group, have called for the abolition of the European Union completely. They've rolled back on that a bit now, but they're now calling for the withdrawal of Germany from the European Union. And if either Germany or France withdraws from the European Union effectively ceases to exist. So we shouldn't be shy. This is not a minor or a minority position. The attacks by Europe against our democracies and against the states, there are many, many people who are aware of that. There's 20% of the European Parliament at the moment, which is on a very, very similar policy position to ourselves. And I have absolutely no doubt that after the next European elections, they are probably going to be the biggest single group. There are two groups there at the moment. If they amalgamate, I have no doubt they'll be the biggest group within the European Parliament. So that gives us an opportunity to say, look, you're not wasting your vote here. If you elect a member of the Irish Freedom Party to the European Parliament, he is likely to be associated with the largest and most effective bloc within the European Parliament. And that's where the movement is happening in Europe. So look, I do think there are great opportunities there for us, but we've got to get our message out. Some of the policies I mentioned have nothing to do with European Parliament. Some of them do. And I think that the fact that there are so many parties within the European Parliament who are on the same sheet as ourselves is a great encouragement to us. And we should not be shy about putting our position forward. So I am glad to be in a position to announce that we have 3 candidates for the 3 seats. I am prepared to run in the constituency of Munster. Mr. Herman Kelly is prepared to run in the constituency of Connacht Ulster, or North East as it's called at the moment. Mine is Munster and South East. And Mr. Gerard O'Conor has very generously agreed to run in the Dublin constituency. So everybody in this country will have we may be crazy, but you're only young and foolish ones. So everybody in this country will have an opportunity to vote on those issues that I mentioned. And I think very often people are, well, I've nobody to vote for. You do now. You do have an alternative, and I think that's got to be one of our slogans. You have an alternative. We've now got to consider how can we get our message out, because we know perfectly well the media will do everything to pretend we don't exist. It will not cover us. Our membership has to do everything it can to get the message out in whatever way possible, in terms of producing leaflets, in terms of letting people know there is a message out there. We're in early. We're now announcing 3 candidates, and we're quite early. A lot of the parties haven't done this yet. So from now on, we have 3 credible candidates. We've got to get those photographs out there. We've got to get those policies out there. We've got to see about fundraising. We've got to see what can we do to raise some realistic funds. I mean, running a European election campaign is, for each constituency, is several €100,000. We don't have those kind of funds, and we probably won't be able to raise them, but we've got to make an effort, and we've got to do what we can. There is goodwill out there. There's a lot of goodwill out there for the policies that we enunciate, and I think people will rally to us to some extent. The question is, can we get our message out? And that'll be the big challenge for us. So, once I found in the past that once an election of any kind is on, the membership tends to become a bit more innovative. Right, we've got something to focus on now. Right, we can do something now. At a practical level, I can help out. So let's try and use that energy. Let's go forward. I have a good deal of optimism on the European elections. It's the kind of an election where our party could do very well. It's the kind of election where there could be a protest vote. And I have no doubt whatsoever that in regard to most of our policies, the great majority of people will be supportive of us. So let's get that message out, and let's get somebody elected to Brussels. Thank you very much.